Okay, it's Wednesday, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me once again. Wednesday Whine with Ana Belaval. I'm Ana Belaval, live from Chicago, Illinois. How's everybody doing? How's your Wednesday treating you? Just to remind you, I do this every Wednesday since the quarantine started because Wednesdays are a really hard day for me. They're kind of like in the middle, in the way. And I caught myself just venting with you guys with a glass of wine. And I was like, you know what? Maybe we should make this a thing. And a friend of mine said, you should make this a thing. So we made it a thing. So it's called Wednesday Whine with an H because I whine a lot, but we also get to find out amazing stories from what I would consider regular people, but they're not regular because they're outstanding. And also we learn a little bit, which is great for a Wednesday, right? Hi, Debbie. I'm glad you can join us today. Let me know where you're joining us from. Hi, TJ. It's great to see you guys. I know we're on YouTube and Facebook, and it's fantastic that you've joined us. So today's topic, and I always say this is real near and dear to me, but listen, I come from a long line of anxiety-ridden people. Some of us haven't been like officially diagnosed. Some people have. Mental illness in my family is not rare, but fortunately, accepting and looking for help hasn't been rare either. So just so you get some background, hi, Jeanette from Orlando. Hi, Roberto. Hi, Patty. So just so you get some background, when I was 13 years old, I had major separation anxiety from my parents. And I knew at an early age that didn't feel right. That was making me physically ill. And that I wanted to change it because I had some goals to achieve at 13. I know, I was that strange. And I asked my parents to send me to therapy. And my parents said, absolutely, which is not necessarily the norm in 1980 something in Puerto Rico. But my parents both have been in therapy and found it's almost, my brother said that it was almost like going to church or taking your vitamins at home. And that is not the reality for a lot of people. It's taboo. So the pandemic hits and everyone who deals with anxiety and those who didn't know anything about it, it was exacerbated. But just so you have an idea, it is the most common mental issue in the United States. 40 million people have it, but less than 40% receive treatment. Usually people want to fix it by talking to their mom or going to work out or just suffer in silence because they can't identify it. And I want that to stop. I want the stigma on looking for help from an outsider who's been trained to do this. I want that to stop being taboo. Because if you suffer from something like this, you've probably inherited it. So your family may not be that great outlet. Your friends may not be able to deal with it. And I've always believed that a third opinion, like an objective opinion with the education to deal with it, it should be your first choice. It's not for everybody. There's other ways to do it in 2021. And that is why I wanted to talk to Dr. Butler-Ziegler. I love Dr. Inger's name, all of it. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So Dr. Inger is with the Feinberg School of Medicine, Northwestern, and she has a PhD in psychology, but she also believes in meditation and mindfulness. So you're going to get the whole package with this woman. I'm super gung-ho about therapy, but Dr. Inger wants you to also stay active, which I hate every time, Inger, that my therapist is like, how often are you working out? I'm like, stop it with the working out and the walking in the forest preserve.
The walking in the forest preserve is important. I'm with your therapist on that.
I know. And, I wanted to talk about this because I told you, it's almost like a trigger for me when someone says, oh, I just found the support of my family, or after telling me that for 3 days, you've been sick with worry. Mm-hmm. But I also think that not everybody is suffering from anxiety. There is something called a healthy amount of anxiety. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What is that?
Sure. Well, I first want to say I so appreciate you starting with that personal story. I remember having pretty significant anxiety in childhood as well that I didn't label as anxiety at the time, but having what now I look back on as panic attacks. And even asking my parents to go to therapy and being met with the opposite response of, what do you need therapy for? You're fine. And so, I think being able to identify, what those signs and symptoms are and when it's time to get help, particularly from an early age, is really important. But thinking about anxiety across that spectrum, anxiety often starts with stress. And so that's something, of course, we've all been talking about over this last year as we've been going through the pandemic and civil unrest and all of the things that many of us are dealing with in our day-to-day lives. And simply defined, we can think of anxiety as poorly managed stress. So stress that has not been effectively managed over time that then magnifies into a greater issue, more symptoms occurring over a longer period of time. When we think about a clinical anxiety, it's difficult to control fear or worry that's out of proportion to whatever the instance is. So this is people who are worrying about everything all the time, right? And worrying about everything all the time such that it's interfering with being able to function day to day. So you're staying up all night. You can't concentrate at work. You're feeling physically ill. Your stomach is, doing that weird thing. You have headaches all the time, muscle tightness and tension. And when you're right, there is a healthy amount of alertness or, anticipation anxiety. You have a work thing coming up, a family thing coming up. And usually once that thing passes, the anxiety goes away. There's time to be concerned when the anxiety doesn't go away, when the thing, whatever that environmental situation passes, and you're worried about, now you've replaced it with worry about the next thing.
Is there stress that is created by our minds? Because you were talking about stressful moment that hasn't been addressed properly. But as a child, as an adult, I create movies in my head of everything that can go wrong. I have 2 children that do the same thing and a husband that do the same thing. We, you're going to call us worry words, but we are constantly thinking when the other shoe's going to drop. Or even if something good is happening, how can it be messed up? But nothing is. It's created by. So is that something that is happening in our brains?
Sure. Yeah. So when we think about anxiety, we think about the emotional piece, the cognitive or the thought piece, and the physical or the body piece. And what you're talking about is the cognitive piece. And so that's what the content of those fears and worries. Worry about the next bad thing happen, worrying about predicting something in the future, worry about personal safety, worry about, did I do it right? What does this person think of me? Did I forget to do something? I have 100 things on my list that I need to get done and only an hour to get them done. How am I going to get everything done? The list just goes on and on and on and on. And we call that kind of ruminating thoughts, where we're turning these thoughts over and over in our mind. And if you think about it, I talked about that spectrum where anxiety can get in the way of, getting things done during the day. When your mind is caught up worrying about so many things, it can be difficult to concentrate on that which is in front of you,
right.
Like your work, like your family, or what have you.
Like driving,
right? So it's the mental stuff, the mental events in our head, plus the physical stuff. Right. For me, I know my anxiety shows up in headaches, and it shows up in my heart will start racing.
Mine's in my stomach.
Okay. Yeah. So
my mom calls it nervous stomach.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as a kid, I used to cough. So my chest would tighten, and I used to cough. And so I would always get annoyed because my mom's like, "Está nerviosa." And I'm like, why does she not think that I'm sick? But most of the time she was right. I was anticipating, I had something going on. And the same thing with the stomach. We Belavals have weak stomachs because we are anxiety-ridden people. Sure. So what should be the first step? Let's say if you're feeling like this is not a normal headache, I've been like this, the moment has passed and I'm still worried. What should be the first step to try and alleviate or deal with this anxiety?
Sure. So I would maybe take a step back and see where you are on that spectrum of stress or anxiety. So if there's some sort of circumstance, environmental circumstance that you're anticipating, and then when that moment passes, you notice the symptoms start to go away, then, you might be in that realm of the healthy stress that we talked about it. If this is an experience you've been having for weeks or even months, that's when it's time to start taking an inventory of your symptoms. So where is your mind? What is the content of your mind? What is the rational or irrational content of those thoughts? So in other words, are those worries really out of proportion to the worry that you should be experiencing given the circumstance? How is the anxiety showing up in your body? That's back to the exercise and the walk, the walks through the forest. Right, because sometimes it's easier for us to tackle the physical than it is the mental. The mental can be really helpful for a therapist to step into and say, well, maybe that isn't something that is likely to happen. And it can be difficult for people to kind of think through that. But the physical, that exercise, those walks, the sitting, the regulating of the breath is a place that people can start to work through their anxiety independently before making contact with a therapist.
See, I'm learning something new because I immediately give someone my therapist number. Is therapy...
That's a good thing too. That's a good thing too.
Is therapy for everyone?
I think many people can benefit from therapy. Therapy often has been, many people often think of therapy as something as a last resort, or you have to be in a state of a nervous breakdown or completely, disabled in some way. And, it's my hope that the conversation starts to shift not only to prevention, but identifying those early stages of distress such that we can, we don't have to get to that really severe place of depression, anxiety, or what have you before reaching out to get some help. So, I won't say it's for everyone, but I do think a lot of people, probably more than are willing to admit, could likely benefit from therapy. Yes.
Right. What's really interesting is that I see people reaching out to their doctors for medication before they reach out for therapy. Sure. And that worries me.
Sure. Well, I think there are a number of reasons for that. I have to admit that even as a mental health provider, I recognize that it is difficult to navigate the mental health service system.
Totally.
And so, primary care providers are a really important gateway, a first line of defense to being able to say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. What are my options? The challenge comes in, as we were talking about earlier, is that often people want an easier, quick fix rather than the more long-term, perhaps difficult work of sorting out all those thoughts that are causing that distress. And that is what occurs in therapy. And so, our primary care providers can be a really important gateway to connecting people to a therapist, while also, if appropriate, giving them a medication to help ease the symptoms that are presenting in the present.
So I've been on medication for 4 years now, and I've been in therapy since I was 13. And my therapist, he knows that I like to diagnose myself. So he had resisted the many times that I had asked for medication. And even at my darkest, which was probably when I was suffering from postpartum blues, not a full depression, but I was freaked out. My hormones were all over the place. And I was like, you need to give me something right now. And he was able to talk me off the proverbial ledge. 4 years ago, after Hurricane Maria happened, and a friend of mine was diagnosed with cancer again, and I had a lot of things going on. I asked him, I told my gynecologist, and she said, yeah, maybe it's time. Talk to your therapist. And I spoke to my therapist, and it said, it's time. And I'm resistant to when I hear comments like, oh, I take something because it'll be faster. Mine didn't kick in that quickly.
That's true. It's a common misperception. That's true.
obviously it's not Xanax, it's not the strong ones, it's like citalopram or something like that, and it's 10 milligrams once a day. When I don't take it, I realize I'm not taking it because your body reacts to it. But when I started, Dr. Inger, what are people talking about that it's going to take the edge off quickly?
Well, I think you're honing in on an important misperception. We hear about these various anxiety medications in pop culture, and I think in some ways they become a lot of misperception around them stems from that. Like, as you mentioned, Xanax, it's talked about all the time. And so then that kind of gets implanted in our brains as a way of, potentially dealing with the things that are coming up. But there are those fast acting anxiety medications that are also short-lived, right? So for something like a panic attack right in the moment, whereby it addresses those immediate acute symptoms, and then, the effects taper hours later. And then the longer acting, I think you said citalopram medications, sure. But, that's why conversation with a therapist and or psychiatrist to help sort out those individual symptoms and needs in conjunction with what is the underlying trigger or root of that worry is really important.
It has had to, you were saying that there are two things that this pandemic has brought. More awareness of anxiety and mental issues, but then a higher demand, which means that when you're looking for a provider, you can't find them.
Yes. Yeah, I think the pandemic, because it's been this universal, difficult experience whereby everyone is feeling some level of stress, depression, or anxiety, that's created a really important space where I believe there's maybe a little bit less stigma attached to talking about these issues. There's not so much shame or it's just me, because everybody's kind of going through it together. And just anecdotally, the numbers of people that are expressing even interest in connecting with a mental health provider seem to be increasing. I shared with you that a lot of my friends are asking about therapy. The numbers of emails I get around inquiries for therapy certainly have increased. However, everyone I know is also full. And so, while the demand has increased, the number of providers available, unfortunately, has not increased such that the demand can be met. And that leaves a really unfortunate number of people that are suffering and, having a difficult time getting the help that they need in this moment.
Besides the demand and the lack of time that these providers have, is there an issue of accessibility in terms of money, financial?
Sure. So, I get asked the question all the time of where can I go to get free services? And unfortunately, I never have a good answer to that question. There are some places that offer sliding scale services. Sometimes community mental health centers will do that. However, completely free services are really hard to come by. And particularly those who are dealing with more complex issues that might not be the place to best meet the individual needs. I know that at Northwestern, our community mental health center, Stone Mental Health Clinic, also has a waiting list upwards of 4 months. And that's a place that offers those sliding scale services. And you have to be in the catchment area as well.
Right.
So another many barriers to accessibility.
Another hurdle.
Right. That's right.
It doesn't help. It really doesn't help. So kind of like to figure this out. You want people to get moving, to realize what's triggering the anxiety, and then realize if it's crippling them, right?
Sure. Yeah. So
I say this as I sip my wine.
Sure. So with, in terms of a self-assessment, taking stock of where is your mind, what's showing up in your body, and any changes in your functioning that have occurred over the last, let's say, several weeks or months. Okay. Right. So if you're noticing changes in your sleeping patterns, noticing changes in your eating patterns, noticing that you're more irritable, noticing that you are withdrawing from friends and family and not doing the things that typically would give you joy or pleasure, that's pushing you toward that end of the spectrum where seeking additional supports would likely be helpful. Outside of seeking, external therapy, some things that can be helpful to do independently, as we said, stay moving, maintaining a daily structure, which is, I think, maybe the number one thing in the context of COVID, where many of us are at home. Many folks are at home with their kids in the house. Work is seeping into the evenings and the weekends, where that structure is fallen by the wayside. But keeping that structure can be an important part of stabilizing the mood. And so I would say that the self-monitoring and also staying active as well.
What is your relationship with the internet? With people Googling services, with people using apps, with people, checking out YouTube conversations like ours?
Yeah. So, I think the internet, particularly in the context of the pandemic, has its pluses and minuses. In the context of the pandemic, it's really been a way for people to help stay connected with folks, which is really important, as so many people have felt lonely and isolated. And so I think that's a great resource. On the other hand, much of the information that has been coming out over the last year or more has been a source of anxiety, worry about schools, worry about contracting COVID, worry about the civil unrest. And so too much engagement with that type of content can also lead to people feeling even more anxious. So I would, again, invite people to do a personal assessment of, is this a positive relationship that I have with my internet use? Or is this internet use triggering for me? Because it can be a fun thing. It can be fun to do something mindless, if Facebook or YouTube or your Netflix shows, whatever it might be, gives you some ease or relaxation. I think that's important. But if you're finding yourself keyed up, then that might be time to pull away.
But what I was asking you specifically is, like, remember I told you when I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I know there is a service online where you can get, I think it's called Talkspace. There's also YouTube videos about breathing exercises, mindfulness. I'm a fan of Yoga with Adrienne, and she has weeks.
Oh, I like Adrienne. I love Adrienne.
I love Adrienne. She has weeks for certain issues, and I click on them and enjoy them. Since the access to mental health is so difficult, has the YouTube helped? Has this kind of internet access helped?
I believe it has. I think the opening up of these different tools to help with mental wellness have been really helpful. A lot of even you mentioned Yoga with Adrienne, and even studio-based yoga instructors that are now offering virtual classes, virtual meditations that really increase the accessibility to that type of programming to folks. And I see a lot of people doing that on a sliding scale or even a free basis. And I think all of those are really important resources for people to have in their toolkit.
I love it because a lot of people have amazing comments about this. And so, Jeanette says she can easily get a panic attack at the Jewel, because here's the thing: panic attacks, you don't know when they're going to hit you. And once you have one, then you can predict the others and try and find something to do with them. Talk a little bit about the panic attack and how to identify that it's, because so many people end up at the hospital like, I'm dying of a heart attack, and kind of feel embarrassed when the doctor's like, oh, no, that was a panic attack.
Sure. So, as you're mentioning, so often people have panic attacks and they don't readily identify it as such. It can come on very acutely, the physical symptoms of heart racing, feeling flush, tightness or tension, shortness of the breath, whereby often people feel like they're having some sort of, it is a physical reaction, but a medical condition is coming on, and they may find themselves in the emergency room. A therapist can be helpful in helping folks to identify what the trigger for those panic attacks are. So sometimes it can be a fear of safety. Sometimes it can be fear of being trapped in or closed in and not being able to escape. Sometimes whatever that trigger is really unidentifiable. And for folks that suffer from more severe panic attacks, the panic attack can then lead to a fear of having another panic attack. And that's what we call panic disorder. So you have them, they become chronic. And then now the initial
it's another
trigger,
layer. It's another layer.
That's another
I know. Stephanie says stomach palpitations and whole body tingles. I've gotten that too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anxiety, panic, that falls into both of those buckets.
And until you realize how good breathing is for you.
Yes.
Which I learned through voice lessons, believe it or not, how important breathing was to kind of have a check on my whole body. You don't realize how powerful that is.
Yeah, one tip around that is what I call anxious breathing. That comes from the top of the chest, that throat breathing, versus the healthier breathing or the belly breathing that comes from down low at the belly button. So if you're wondering kind of where you are on the spectrum of anxiety, you can kind of use that to do a self-assessment. Is your breath short and rapid coming from your throat, or is it deep, even, and steady coming from your belly?
I know. And I have so many friends who used to dance with me that say dance does it for them. And it's true. Mi alivio es el ballet. I know, Giselle, because we used to dance together. And that is the one outlet that I have found, the only workout where my mind goes blank. And I spend an hour without worry. Sometimes the silence in yoga gets to me, and I'm constantly fighting that battle, Dr. Inger, with no. You're sitting on the mat. Refocus. And I think that's why I've liked yoga with Adrienne, because she is very honest about how your mind can wander. But I thought that's why I always think meditation's not for me, because I'm going to sit there and think about other things.
That's very true. And that's why physical activity can be really important for people that are struggling with anxiety, because when you really get into the body, then you come out of the mind, right? And so you're in the present moment, you're feeling all of your senses, and it's more difficult for your mind to worry about all of those things in the future. What you're saying is exactly right. With yoga, with more space, the mind can still wander. And that's part of the practice. When I'm working with people. And
I didn't know that.
That's part of the inviting back over and over again. That I'm doing it again. That's when I'm working with folks, I'm just noticing I'm doing it again. I'm thinking about the next thing, coming back right here on the mat, coming back to this posture.
This is a great question from Sharon. How should I explain that to my kids when I'm experiencing a panic attack? I sometimes tell them my brain is telling me my body to freak out for no reason, but I also have severe ones that I don't know how to explain.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think you're starting in the right direction, letting kids know that, I'm having a period of worry, and my body is responding to that right now. Would be some simple language that you might be able to use. But, again, just drawing that connection between the mind and the body, and sometimes things that are happening in the mind can also impact what's showing up in our bodies.
Lori, what about someone who has an autoimmune disease with back issues and can't be really physical and yet suffers from anxiety? And she also has issues with insomnia.
The breath, doing breath work. Yeah.
I never thought I would agree, but my gosh, now it's natural for me. That breath, right? I like this because I wake up at 2 a.m, and after you reach a certain age, that happens. That's when my mind starts racing.
Sure.
How do you turn it off?
Yeah. So again, there's so many times when I think coming back to the breath is important, but this is a time when I would invite someone to just lay down in the bed, put a hand on the chest, a hand on the belly, and just start by noticing the breath and expand out to noticing the other sensations that are showing up in the body. And that's a very generic mindfulness practice, but more simply stated, it's inviting yourself back to the present moment again, over and over and again, because when our minds are turning over, we're worrying about something in the future that has yet to come. And so when you engage in your senses, engage in the body, notice the breath, notice your sensations, you're present and can't worry about what's going to happen next.
I tell myself it's 3 a.m. You can't fix that right now.
Yeah, that's great.
I also I started doing this thing, Dr. Inger. I go, to like move, to like shake the thought away. I go,
I like it. I like it.
I don't know if anyone catches me doing it, but if something pops in and I'm like, not now.
What I hear in that is an awareness that your mind is going there. And so you're catching your mind wanting to go there and you're bringing it back.
I love this from Angelica. One of the things I do is ask myself a difficult question that's not impossible to answer, but asking myself a question stops the thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
My therapist always told me, think about the worst thing that could happen and how you would deal with it.
Sure. Another extension of that is the thing that you fear or worry about so much, how likely is that outcome to happen?
Yes.
And often it's low. Often it's low.
Bueno. If you're catastrophic like me, you'll find a way.
Yeah.
You'll find a way. But it's true. It's like my grandma had this saying that my mom would tell us constantly, that was like, don't worry, it'll never happen. The thing that worries you the most won't happen. And then my therapist added to that, like, so if it happens, what would you do? Because I think that a lot of people, that loss of control freaks me out. And I remember reading Michelle Obama's book when she said, the loss of control of, especially, and I don't know why I go to this passage because that was probably not the most significant part of her book, but I remember, because this is how I deal with my anxiety, when he was announcing his candidacy in Springfield in the middle of January, she knew it was going to be freezing and they wanted to do it outside. And she was like, what can I control? Well, I can control that my girls have 3 layers on, mittens and earmuffs. And that gave her a level of control that calmed her down. And I've been doing that more often than not. And like, I'll sit there and be like, okay, in this, what can I control? And what do I need to let go?
That's right. That's right. Identifying what's in your control and letting go of the rest.
What about light therapy? Still effective this time of year? I don't know what that is.
Yeah. So one of my colleagues actually at Northwestern, Dr. Dorothy, said is a light therapy expert, and it certainly can help stabilize the circadian rhythms that can lead to some instability of the mood. And so depending on the individual circumstance, they can be effective year round. There's a prescribed way to use the light boxes. Using them at certain periods of time during the day and looking into them for a prescribed period of time. But they certainly have some good science behind them.
Is it normal to have a panic attack in the middle of your sleep?
It's not unusual. Yeah.
Really?
No, it's not unusual. The thoughts that can pop up in the sleep can trigger that panic attack or anxiety, certainly.
Oh, this one's speaking my language. Is general anxiety tied to perimenopause and hormones as well?
Sure.
Preach.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, like we needed more stress. Like I needed my gynecologist to tell me, you're over 40, you'll never sleep well again.
Yeah, but often having that explanation can give people, again, some sense of control and understanding as to what's going on.
Absolutely. Because that's the other thing. Information is power. And that's why I wanted you to join me today, Dr. Inger Burnett-Ziegler, because I wanted to inform people before they dismiss their feelings, before they rush to try and get a Band-Aid on it, and to be kind with themselves.
That's right. And compassionate.
How important that is. And sometimes, Inger, I felt like that was being self-indulgent, and that was being, oh, you're having a pity party. Oh, stop whining. People have bigger problems. And in this day and age, I've learned to be like, nope, you are fine having these feelings, and you know how to deal with them, and be kind to myself.
I couldn't agree more. And I can say as a professional and as a human, being hard on ourselves is not doing us any good. It's often making the problem worse. It's making us feel bad. And when we feel bad, we're not doing the things that we need to do in order to take care of ourselves and live our best lives. So we all need a little grace right now.
We all need a little grace, and know that this too shall pass, and that we have the power, and there are ways to move out of that rut, to learn to live with it, because this is not cured. You learn to walk with it and be successful in spite of it.
That's right. That's right. We can minimize it, handle it, develop some good coping skills, and tackle it head on.
Thank you so much, Inger.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
So wonderful to meet you. I'll send you a link to this so you can put it on your social medias. Where can people find you? Are you active on social media, or you're more of an academic?
Little bit of both.
Good.
So on Twitter, I'm IBZ, Psych PhD, and on Instagram, I'm Dr. Inger BZ.
Thank you so much, Dr. Inger. Such
you.
a pleasure to have you tonight. Have a wonderful rest of your week, okay?
Same to you. Take care.
Bye-bye. Oh, I feel new, right? What a great conversation. What a feeling that we're not alone in this. And I think that's the important thing, that we are taught not to talk about our feelings, not to show weakness, not to share our reality, especially on social media, and to be able to be honest and have a conversation like this where we are not we're not shamed and we're not embarrassed, and we realize that a lot of us are in this boat together is wonderful. So I hope that we can help you today. And of course, always talk to a professional to see where you are in this anxiety spectrum. And these were just great suggestions from one of the many professionals that tackle this every day and are educated in the field. Thank you so much, guys. And next week, we're going to talk health. All those diets that you're loving to do, the paleo, why isn't that working for you? What's the other one? The keto and all that. We're going to talk to a health coach about that next week. So thank you for joining us. If you are on YouTube, leave us your comments on Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us. Salud y que Dios me los cuide.